even though literally as I do this, there's been a Russian helicopter attack on a airport near the city of Kiev in Ukraine. Um, Obviously, I am still aware of that, and we will still be covering that. But of course, there are again other events and other things that we must talk about here in the UK. Um, like I say, the world will keep on turning, and the Ukraine situation probably ain't going to be resolved, certainly anytime soon this week, probably well into next week. I think this is going to be a long-term thing that we see going on in Ukraine. But besides that, we turn to something else, because the grey vote, the idea of the over 60s voting for Johnson and more conservatively, shall we say, for the Conservatives, has been set in stone almost in this country. But since 2016, we are still feeling what is called the Brexit ripple effect, and it is still very much unsettling the political landscape of the UK, and still continues to do so. We saw in two very recent by-elections that they didn't really get behind Johnson. Not only that, they themselves are probably the most amount of people least likely to be motivated to go out and vote for Johnson, even though they vote Tory. Johnson has been a very demotivational factor for them. And if one thing is true in politics, is that you always pay attention to your core base. And Johnson has not been doing that at all. In fact, he's done a lot of things that has probably angered that base more than anything. And when a party loses its core support, its base support, well, then things can start to go very wrong very quickly. So before we do get into this, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below there are my Patreon page and my rotation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all those people who do support the channel that way. So this comes from the Yorkshire Bylines with the title of "Never mind the Grey Report, the Grey Vote could sink Johnson." The number one lessons for politicians is don't piss off your core vote. Or if you do, make sure it's done mid-election cycle so that they at least have a couple of years to forget about it. And increasingly, Johnson is tying himself in knots as he seeks to try and oppose these very voracious right-wingers on his backbenchers, the easing of COVID restrictions, whilst also trying to appeal to swing voters in those target red wall seats, aka the levelling up agenda. However, much of the Prime Minister's, as he's trying to wing it, is the very insightful piece by Escher Webb. This exposes there is a sense that the final irony of the consummate people pleaser may, but he ends up pleasing no one, and is most likely to be at the bedrock of Tory voters who are over 60. All the voters won the election for the Tories in 2015, 2017, and 2019. And after the 2019 general election, The Guardian reflected on the divide between the old and young is now a greater determination of how people vote than class. And of course, between 1987 and 2010, the Conservatives never scored higher than 48% amongst over 65s, and Labour never scored lower than 31%. And in 2019, the Conservative vote share among the over 55s, or over 65s, was more than 60%. Keeping these voters happy, especially in the red wall seats, is going to be crucial at the next general election. So, the decision by Sunak last September to suspend the triple lock on pensions was a very brave one. The triple lock has been key to keeping the pensioners, key to keeping the pensioners inflation-proof by linking them each year in line with earnings, inflation, or rise of at least 2.5%, whichever is higher. It was introduced by the Tories in 2010, and its maintenance was very much a key pledge in the 2019 general election manifesto. But as wages grew last summer, the June figures had wages rise by at least 8.8%. The Chancellor got the wobbles with the realisation that, according to the official figures obtained by The Guardian, pension increase would cost the Exchequer at least $5 billion more than the 2.5% increase. Instead, he held off until the autumn and then announced that pensioners would be linked to the inflation rate of 3.1%. But the fact that inflation was rising was blindingly obvious even then. Sunak either chose to ignore that or had just taken a leaf out of his own boss's book and just thought that he could wing it. When the pensioners are updated in April, inflation will be at least the double figure that the Chancellor based that pension increase on. That means for the very first time in decades, there will be a real cut in the state pension. And according to Paul Wine in the Eye, this means that a single pensioner will have at least £4.64 pence a week less than if they'd been granted the inflationary increase. And having abandoned their triple lock manifesto commitment, this means that when the broken earnings link is taken into account, older people are facing an income of at least £7.45 a week less than they had been promised. This is the biggest hit to their spending power since 1975. And of course, don't forget that the winter fuel allowance has been frozen since 2010. Given the rise in fuel costs, that means that this isn't just an allowance that's frozen, it's the hard-up pensioners will be frozen too. As an insult to injury, plans by the Department of Health and Social Care will scrap NHS prescriptions in England and Wales for those aged between 60 and 65 are now on the horizon. This could come in between spring, according to Walt, and could save the Treasury at least £2.57 million a year. The government obviously had put a consultation document out last October on the prescription charges, and of course the government has spotted a very perceived loophole. That people receive free prescriptions when they turn 60 in England, whereas the state pension age has gradually been increasing for men and women. The consultation document suggests the two options for change. First of all, option A would raise the qualifying age for the prescriptions, currently 66, for everyone. Option B was, of course, to raise the qualifying age for free prescriptions to the SPA, currently 66, but with a period of protection, which could mean that people from age range of 60 to 65 would continue to receive free prescriptions, but those currently of 59 will have to start to pay at the age of 60. Both obviously come with a very killer clause, saying that if people have been exempt from charges previously or were expecting to become exempt at 60, do not understand the change in agreements, they may not pay for their prescription, believing themselves exempt and subsequently a penalty charge notice. As Wagner said, the prospect of Johnson of escaping the penalty notice after lockdown parties, only to see the over 60s landed now with penalty notices because of the NHS cost cutting, would be a very bad look indeed. This on top of whether the Sue Gray report, again linked to sorry, I've lost my place now. Johnson may not get Gray may not get Johnson, but of course the other Greys might. And no one likes obviously being lied to, and no one likes a serial liar. The break, of course, with the triple lock is a very clear breach of the Tory 2019 manifesto pledge. This is now the biggest hit to the pension spending power since 1975. The old Labour obviously may take this new meaning as the Labour Party starts to campaign hard, at least, on the impacts of the pensions. And the Shadow Work and Pension Secretary, John Ashworth, has reported in the Evening Standard saying this in real terms, on top of the cut of the rocketing heat bills and fuel prices, and others, such as part of the free TV licenses, means that thousands of pensioners will face a very tough and bleak year ahead, faced with impossible choices between heating or eating. And of course, pensioners aren't daft. They know that the government wrote off at least the $8.7 billion it spent on protective equipment during the pandemic. And even the Treasury has written off at least $4.3 billion of fraudulent claims made on the emergency COVID-19 scheme. So, to tell them in April that they have the fastest growing economy in Europe, when in fact they have now less money in their pockets, while at the very same time trying to reassure voters that the economy is safe in Tory hands, eyes to the right, nose to the left, and the Greys will indeed have it. So that is indeed a very interesting political situation going forward for Johnson, because if he's alienating now a core base of the Tory party, that could spell a lot of disasters for the incoming upcoming, shall we say, next general election. As we've talked about before, we've talked about the Tory nightmare scenario, which is the collapse of the blue wall in the south, as well as their collapse of their red wall seats in the north. That could wipe out the Tory party. And as we've seen very recently, talks of an electoral pact between Keir Starmer with Labour and the Lib Dems. That nightmare slowly becomes ever more surely the more now potential of coming true. And if that does come true, well, Johnson is going to have a lot of explaining to do. And trust me, if the Sue Gray report doesn't get him, then he will be sent spinning if the Tory nightmare scenario does come true and both of those walls collapse. And trust me, they will collapse straight onto Johnson's head. So with that said, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page and a notification link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you all